Rob Francis is an academic and writer based in London. He mainly writes short fantasy and horror, and his stories have appeared in magazines including The Arcanist, Apparition Lit, Metaphorosis, Tales to Terrify, and Weird Horror magazine. Rob has also had stories published in various anthologies, including Alternative War, The Old Ways, and Cost of Living. And I'll put his social media in the chat for everybody. Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Elaine, and thanks everyone. Quite hard to follow all those great readings, so I'll have a go. Just as a bit of context for my story, so the teenage protagonist Roisin and her dad are duck hunting on their eccentric neighbour's farm, and the farmer is nicknamed Skinflint, and that's why this story is called Skinflint's Block. And it's a bit more pulpy than some of the others, not quite as beautifully written, I think. So they passed through an orchard, apple and cherry trees heavy with fruit, their rotten fallings bursting underfoot. The air was thick with the sweet smell of decay. Roisin could hear the honking of ducks now, not too far away. The lake's close now. Roisin swallowed. Her heart beat a little faster as she wiped her sweating palms on her trousers. They stopped at the edge of the wood. The lake stretched before them, its surface green with algae. Reeds and rushes sprouted from the lake edge, merging with the long grass, so that it was hard to tell where the field ended and the lake began. But the ducks were there. Someone had set up a long table in the lake shallows, and the birds were fussing around something atop it. Their plumage was orange with yellow streaks, their bills a dark red. As Roisin watched, they hopped back and forth, pecking away. At first, she thought the thing on the table was a pig carcass, flesh pale but covered with rivulets of blood. Then she saw the blonde hair and beard. The ducks screwed their beaks deep into the flesh, then threw their heads back, swallowing what they'd torn off. A naked man capered near the ducks, half naked at least. He wore an incomplete costume, his right arm a long wing, and his left bare, except for a taloned glove at the end. His chest was covered in white down, while both legs were yellow scaled, terminating in wide flippers. His face was the most disturbing part of the ensemble, as his lips were wide and rigid, and pursed into a makeshift bill, while his nose was no more than two elliptical slits. As he danced back and forth, his pale root of a penis flapped against his stomach and thighs. Dad turned to her, eyes wide. "Skinflint," he whispered. Then, "Jesus." Roisin looked again. This time, she wasn't all that sure it was a costume. The man on the table gurgled something, and Skinflint stopped his cavorting. He padded over to the man, webbed feet slapping up spray from the grass with each step. His taloned hand reached out to the man, then twisted to seize one of the blood-covered ducks, its beak still dripping viscera. Skinflint tipped back his head and held the duck over it. He opened his elongated lips, mouth yawning wide. The duck shuddered and laid a pale orange egg, which disappeared into Skinflint's mouth. He swallowed. The duck returned to feeding. Roisin gave an involuntary yelp, and Skinflint's head snapped up. She pressed herself to the ground. The rich earth scent was strong in her nostrils, the grass still wet enough to stick to her cheeks. The only sound was the frenzied feeding of the ducks. She raised her head a little. Skinflint was padding towards the trees, eyes rolling, a faint grunting coming from his throat. His bill lips clacked with each step. Dad crouched in the grass and fired the Beretta, both barrels of birdshot, the gun's roar startling the ducks and setting them to flight. Skinflint staggered and almost fell. Black blood ran in a dozen tiny channels across his chest and wing. He raced towards Dad, hissing with fury. Dad dropped the gun and rushed to meet him, fists up and his face a mask of terrified ferocity Roisin had never seen. She heard the metallic shriek of the man-trap before she realised what it was, heard the snap as it bit deep into Dad's leg. Momentum carried him forwards to land at Skinflint's webbed feet. He screamed and reached for the twisted man-thing in front of him. Skinflint jumped and came down hard on Dad's back. Quacking happily, he began to caper, his feet slamming into Dad, the edges ripping his clothes, pushing his face into the mud. Roisin pulled the stolen shells from her pocket and raced to the Beretta. Overhead, the ducks were circling lower, getting ready to land. She glanced at the man on the table. He wasn't moving. Hands shaking, her fingers moving slower than she could have imagined, she loaded the shotgun. Skinflint turned to Roisin just as the ducks began to drop. She held her breath, aimed, and fired. Skinflint's head disintegrated in a burst of pulp and bone. His downy chest puffed up for a moment, his wing arm fanned the air, and then his headless body flopped to the ground by her dad. The ducks swung back into the morning sky, shrieking their rage. Roisin's world took on a vibrancy she'd never imagined. The sky opened wide and high above her, and she thought she might be drawn up there into the endless blue. Every nerve screamed with joy at what she'd done. Dad lifted his head, sucking in air, then releasing it again in a long howl. "Get this off me!" Roisin came back to herself. She dropped the gun and ran to her dad. The trap was old, the mechanism rusted. It had closed enough to tear muscle, but there was still a gap she could get her fingers in. She pushed as hard as she could, and after a few moments the jaws opened enough that Dad could slip his leg out before it closed again. "Is it broken, Dad?" "I don't think so." Blood was soaking into his trousers, but it didn't look as bad as Roisin had feared. "Let's get you to a hospital. Where's your phone? I'll call an ambulance." "Not yet. There's something else we need to do first. Help me up." And I'll stop there.